Ralph Neville Bamber, known as Neville, was born on the 8th of June 1924 and was 61 when he passed away. He was a farmer and former RAF pilot and magistrate at the local Witham Magistrates Court. He and his wife, June, who was born on the 3rd of June 1924, was also 61 when she passed away, had married in 1949 and moved into White House Farm on Pages Lane, D'Arcy, Essex, set among 300 acres of tenant farmland and had belonged to June's father. The Court of Appeal described Neville as a well-built man, 6'4" tall and in good physical health. This became significant because Jeremy's defence suggested that Sheila, a slim woman of 28, had been able to beat and subdue her father, something the prosecution contested. Unable to have biological children, the couple adopted Sheila and Jeremy as babies. The children were not related to each other. June suffered from depression and had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital in the 1950s, including in 1958 after Sheila's adoption, where she was given electroshock therapy at least 6 times. In 1982, she was treated by Hugh Ferguson, a psychiatrist who later saw Sheila. The Bambers were financially secure, owning property that included a farmhouse, a flat in London and 300 acres of land and a caravan site. The couple gave the children a good home and private education, but June was insanely religious and tried to force her children and grandchildren to adopt the same ideas. She had a poor relationship with Sheila, who felt June disapproved of her, and June's relationship with Jeremy was so troubled that he had apparently stopped speaking to her. Sheila's ex-husband was concerned about the effect June was having on his sons. She had made them kneel and pray with her, which had upset the boys. Daniel and Nicholas Cathall were born on the 22nd of June 1979 and were 6 when they passed away. They were born to Sheila and Colin Cathall, who married in 1977 and divorced in 1982. Colin was an art student when he met Sheila. Both parents were involved in the children's upbringing after the divorce, although the boys were briefly placed in foster care in 1982 to 1983 because of Sheila's health problems. For several months before the unalivings, they had been with Colin in his home in Kilburn, North London, not far from Sheila's residence in Maida Vale. A week-long visit to White House Farm had been arranged for August 1985 at the Bambers' request. The plan was that the boys would visit their grandparents with Sheila before going on holiday to Norway with her father. Daniel and Nicholas were reluctant to stay at the farm. They disliked that June made them pray, and in the car they asked their father to speak to her about it. In addition, Daniel had become a vegetarian and was worried about being forced to eat meat. When their father dropped them off on the 4th of August, it was the last time he saw them. The boys were buried together in Highgate Cemetery. Sheila was cremated, and the urn of her ashes was placed in their coffin. Sheila Jean Bambi Cathall was born on the 18th of July 1957 and was 28 when she passed away. She was born to the daughter of Eric J., a senior chaplain to the Archbishop of Canterbury. At this instance, the baby was placed for adoption. Her mother gave her up to the Church of England Children's Society 2 weeks after the birth, and Sheila was adopted by the Bambers in October 1957. The chaplain had known Neville in the RAF and selected the Bambers from a list of prospective adopters. After school, Sheila attended Secretarial College in Swiss Cottage, London. In 1974, when she was 17, she discovered she was pregnant by Colin Cathall. The Bambers arranged for an abortion. Her relationship with her mother deteriorated significantly that summer after June found Sheila and Colin sunbathing without any clothes on in a field. June reportedly sat and called Sheila the Devil's Child. Sheila continued with a secretarial course, then trained as a hairdresser, and briefly worked as a model with the Lucy Clayton Agency, which included 2 months' work in Tokyo. After she became pregnant again, she married Colin at Chelmsford Register Office in May 1977 but miscarried in the 6th month. The Bambers bought the couple a garden flat in Carlington Road, Hampstead, to help Sheila recuperate. Sheila suffered another miscarriage, then on the 22nd of June 1979, after 4 months of bed rest in hospital, she gave birth to Nicholas and Daniel. Colin, apparently having begun an affair just before the birth, left Sheila for 5 months. Sheila became increasingly upset. On one occasion, When Colin left her 21st birthday party with another woman, she required hospital treatment after breaking a window with her fist. The couple divorced in May 1982. After the divorce, Neville brought Sheila a flat in Morstead Mansions, Maida Vale, and Colin helped to raise the children from his home in nearby Kilburn. Sheila decided to trace her birth mother, then living in Canada. They met at Heathrow Airport in 1982 for a brief reunion, but the relationship did not develop. At around this time, Sheila became friendly with a group of young women who nicknamed her Bambi, and who later told mothers that she often complained about the poor relationship with her adoptive mother. The group took part in drugs, particularly cocaine, and fraternisation with older men. As a brief modelling career had ended after the birth of the boys, Sheila lived on welfare and low-paying jobs, including a waitress for 1 week at School Dinners, a London restaurant in which dinner was served by young women in school uniform. There were also cleaning jobs and one episode of nude photography that she later regretted. Sheila's mental health continued to decline, with episodes of her banging her head against walls. In 1983, her family doctor referred her to Hugh Ferguson, the psychiatrist who had treated June. Ferguson said Sheila was in an agitated state, paranoid and psychotic. She was admitted to St Andrew's Hospital, a private psychiatric facility, where Ferguson diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder. After Sheila was discharged in September 1983, he continued seeing her as an outpatient and concluded that his first diagnosis had been mistaken. Ferguson now believed that she had schizophrenia and began treating her with triflualizepine, an antipsychotic drug. Ferguson wrote that Sheila believed the devil had given her the power to project evil into others and that she could make her sons have sex and cause violence with her. She called them the devil's children, the phrase June had used for Sheila, and said she believed she was capable of unaliving them or getting them to unalive others. She spoke of suicide, and the court heard that Ferguson did not regard her as a suicide risk. Sheila was readmitted to St Andrews in March 1985, 5 months before the unalivings, after a psychotic episode in which she believed herself to be in direct communication with God and that certain people, including her boyfriend, were trying to hurt or unalive her. She was discharged 4 weeks later and, as an outpatient, received monthly injection of haloperidol, an antipsychotic drug that has a sedative effect. From that point, the twins lived all or most of the time with Colin in Kilburn. According to Jeremy, the family discussed placing the boys in a daytime foster care over dinner the night of the unalivings, with little response from Sheila. Despite Sheila's erratic mental state, Ferguson told the court that the kind of violence necessary to commit the unalivings was not consistent with a view of her. In particular, he said that he did not believe she would have unalived her father or children. In particular, he said he did not believe she would have unalived her father or children, because a difficult relationship was confined to her mother. Collins said the same, that, despite her tendency to throw things and sometimes hit him, she had never harmed the children. June's sister, Pamela Boutflar, testified that Sheila was not a violent person and that she'd never known her to use a gun. June's niece, Anne Eaton, told the court that Sheila did not know how to use one. Jeremy disputed this, telling police on the night of the shooting, as they stood outside the house, that he and Sheila had gone target shooting together. He acknowledged later that he had not seen her fire a gun as an adult. Jeremy Neville Bamber was born on the 13th of January 1961 to a student midwife who, after an affair with a married army surgeon, gave her babies to the Church of England's Children's Society when he was 6 weeks old. His biological parents later married and had other children. His father became a senior staff member in Buckingham Palace. Neville and June adopted Jeremy when he was 6 months old. They sent him to St Nicholas Primary, then along with Sheila to Malden Court Prep School. This was followed when he was 9 in September 1970 by Graham's School, a boarding school in Holt, Norfolk, where he joined the cadet force. Jeremy was apparently upset at Graham's because of bullying and other factors. After leaving Graham's with no qualifications, Jeremy attended Sixth Form College and in 1978 achieved 7 O-levels. Neville paid for him to visit Australia, where he took scuba diving course before travelling to New Zealand. Former friends alleged that Jeremy had broken into a jeweller's shop while in New Zealand and had stolen an expensive watch. He had also boasted, they said, of being involved in smuggling heroin. Jeremy returned to England in 1982 to work on his adopted parents' farm for £170 a week and set up a home in a cottage Neville owned at 9 High Street, Goldhanger. The cottage lay 3 to 3.5 miles from White House Farm and a 5-minute drive by car, at least 15 minutes by bike. Neville also gave Jeremy a car to use and 8% of the family company Osea Road Campsite Limited, which ran a caravan site. To Jeremy's supporters, who over the years have included MPs and journalists, he is believed to be a victim of one of Britain's worst miscarriages of justice. The Guardian took up this case in the early 1990s. One or more Guardian journalists began corresponding with him in 2006, and 2 interviewed him in 2011. Describing Jeremy as clever and strategic, they wrote that there was something about him that made the public unsympathetic towards him. He's reported to have passed a polygraph test in 2007. Jeremy's detractors include his extended family and father's former secretary, Barbara Wilson. She told reporters that Jeremy used to provoke his parents, riding in circles around his mother on a bicycle, wearing makeup to upset his father, and once hiding a bag of rats in Wilson's car. Whenever Jeremy visits the farm, there were arguments, she claimed. Tension had apparently increased in the weeks before the unalivings. Wilson said Neville had remarked to her about foreseeing a shooting accident. Jeremy's girlfriend, Julie Mugford, alleged that he had talked about unaliving his family. A farm worker testified that Jeremy had once said of Sheila, "I'm not going to share my money with my sister." The court heard that, in March of that year, while discussing security at the family's caravan site, Jeremy had told his uncle, "I could unalive anyone. I could even, or easily, unalive my parents." Jeremy denied having said this. On Sunday the 4th of August 1985, 3 days before the unalivings, Sheila and the boys arrived at White House Farm to spend the week with Neville and June. The housekeeper saw Sheila that day and noticed nothing unusual. 2 farm workers saw her the following day with the children and said that she seemed happy. One of the crime scene photographs showed that someone had carved "I hate this place" into the cupboard doors of the bedroom in which the twins were sleeping. Jeremy visited the farm on the evening of Tuesday the 6th of August. He told the court that during his visit, the parents suggested to Sheila that the boys be placed in daytime foster care with a local family. He said Sheila did not seem bothered by the suggestion and that had simply said that she would rather stay in London. The boys had been in foster care before, although in London rather near White House Farm, and had not appeared to cause a problem for Sheila. Ferguson told the Court of Appeal in 2002 that any suggestion that the children be removed from her care would have provoked a strong reaction from Sheila, but that she might have welcomed daytime help. A farm worker heard Jeremy leave around 9:30 p.m. Barbara Wilson, the farm secretary, telephoned Neville at around that time and was left with the impression that she had interrupted an argument. She said Neville was short with her and seemed to hang up in irritation, something he never had done before. He was by all accounts an even-tempered man. June's sister, Pamela Beaufoy, telephoned around 10 p.m. She spoke to Sheila, who she said was quiet, then June, who seemed normal. Jeremy told the court that, hours before the unalivings on the 6th of August, he had loaded the rifle thinking he heard rabbits outside but had not used it. He left the rifle on the kitchen table with a full magazine and a box of ammunition before leaving the house. It did not at that point have the silencer or telescopic sight attached, he claimed. Both had been on the rifle in late July, according to a nephew, but Jeremy said that his father must have removed them. The prosecution disputed this, maintaining that the silencer was on the rifle when the family was unalived. Neville kept several guns at the farm. He was reportedly careful with them, cleaning them after being used and securing them. He had bought the gun on the 30th of November 1984, along with a Parker Hale silencer, telescopic sight, and 500 rounds of ammunition. It used cartridges which were loaded into a magazine that held 10 rounds. 25 shots were fired during the unaliving, so if the rifle was fully loaded to begin with, it would have been reloaded at least twice. The court heard that the magazine became harder to load with each cartridge. Loading the 10th was described as exceptionally hard. The rifle had normally been used to shoot rabbits with a silencer and telescopic sight attached. The court heard that the sight had to be removed by a screwdriver, but was usually left in place because it was time-consuming to realign it. Neville's nephew visited the farmhouse on the weekend of the 26th to the 28th of July 1985 and told the court that he had seen the rifle in the gun cupboard in the ground floor office, with a sight and silencer attached. He had taken the gun and used it for target shooting. Jeremy telephoned Chelmsford Police Station from his home in the early hours of the 7th of August to raise the alarm. He told them that he had received a telephone call from his father, from the landline at White House Farm to the landline at Bamber's home, to say that Sheila had gone berserk with a gun. Jeremy said that the line had gone dead in the middle of the night. The prosecution argued that Jeremy had received no such call, and that his claim to have done this was part of setting the scene to blame Sheila. Neville was severely bloodied at that point, according to the Court of Appeal, but the telephone had no visible blood on it when the police examined the scene, although it was acknowledged that no swabs had been taken. It was Jeremy, the prosecution said, who had left the kitchen telephone off the hook after calling his home from White House Farm to establish that part of his alibi. After Jeremy telephoned the police, a British Telecom operator checked the White House Farm line at 3:56 a.m, according to the police log, and at 4:30 a.m, according to the Court of Appeal, and found that the line was open. The operator could hear a dog barking. British Telecom didn't at the time keep records of local calls. According to experts who testified at the trial, if Neville had telephoned Jeremy without replacing the receiver, the line would have remained open for 1 to 2 minutes. During this time, Jeremy would not have been able to use his telephone. Explaining why he had called the local police station and not 999, Jeremy told police on the night that he had not thought it would make a difference how soon they would arrive. He said he'd spent time looking up the number, and even though his father had asked him to come quickly, he had first telephoned his girlfriend, Julie Mugford, in London, then had driven slowly to the farmhouse. Jeremy acknowledged that he could have called one of the farm workers, but had not considered it. In his early statements, Jeremy said that he'd phoned the police immediately after receiving his father's call, then telephoned Mugford. During later police interviews, he'd called Mugford first. Jeremy said that he was confused about the sequence of events. In 2010, Jeremy's lawyers highlighted 2 police logs in support of his application to have his case referred back to the Court of Appeal. The question was whether the logs support the prosecution position that there was 1 call that night to the police, from Jeremy alone, or the defence position that there were 2 calls, 1 from Neville followed by 2nd from Jeremy. One log shows that Jeremy rang the local police station and spoke to Police Constable Michael West in the information room. As a result, West began an event log. This states that Jeremy's call came in at 3:36 a.m. on the 7th of August 1985. Jeremy maintains that he telephoned 10 minutes after his father phoned him, but at trial it was accepted that West had misread a digital clock, that the call had probably come in just before 3:26 a.m, because that was when West asked a civilian dispatcher, Malcolm Bonnet, to send a car to the scene. The car Charlie Alpha 5 was dispatched at 3:35 a.m. The event log noted a call from the Court of Appeal noted that Jeremy said that he had tried to ring his father back at White House Farm but could not get a reply. During the trial, the court heard that Jeremy said his father had not hung up after speaking and that he could hear noise in the background. At some point, PC West spoke to Jeremy again on the telephone. Jeremy apparently complained about the time the police were taking, saying, "When my father rang, he sounded terrified. He was told to go to the farm and wait for the police." After the telephone calls, Jeremy drove to the farmhouse, as did 3 officers from Witham Police Station who later testified that he had been driving much more slowly than them. They passed him on Pages Lane and arrived at the farmhouse 1 or 2 minutes before him. Jeremy's cousin Anne Eaton testified that he was normally a fast driver. The group waited outside the house for a tactical firearms unit to arrive, which showed up at 5 a.m. and decided to wait until daylight before trying to enter. Police determined that all doors and windows to the house were shut except for the window in the main bedroom on the first floor. Using Loudhailer, they spent 2 hours trying to communicate with Sheila. The only sound they reported from the house was a dog barking. While waiting outside, the police questioned Jeremy, who they said seemed calm. According to the Court of Appeal, Jeremy told them about the phone call from his father and that it had sounded as though someone had cut off the call. He also said that he did not get along with his sister. When asked whether she might have gone berserk with a gun, the police said that he replied, "I don't really know, she's a nutter, she's been having treatment." When asked why Neville would have called Jeremy and not the police, he replied that his father was the sort of person who might want to keep things within the family. Jeremy claimed to have called Chelmsford Police Station rather than 999 because he did not think it would affect the police response time. Over the next few hours, he talked about cars in general with one of the officers, saying that the Osea Road caravan site would be able to stand him a Porsche soon. Jeremy told the police that Sheila was familiar with guns and that they had gone target shooting together. He said he had been at the farmhouse himself a few hours earlier and that he had loaded the rifle because he thought he heard rabbits outside. Jeremy had left the rifle on the kitchen table fully loaded with a box of ammunition nearby. A doctor who was called to the house testified that deaths could have occurred at any time during the night. He said Jeremy appeared to be in a state of shock. He broke down, cried, and seemed to vomit. The doctor said Jeremy told him about the discussion the family had had about possibly placing Sheila's sons in foster care. The police entered the farmhouse at 7:54 a.m. using a sledgehammer to break the back door. The door had been locked from the inside with the key still in the lock. They found 5 bodies with multiple gunshot wounds, Neville downstairs in the kitchen and the rest upstairs. 25 shots had been fired, mostly at close range. In what order the family was unalived is not known. A telephone was lying on one of the kitchen surfaces with its receiver off the hook, next to empty .22 cartridge cases. The police said chairs and stools were overturned and that there was broken crockery, a broken sugar basin, a broken ceiling light, and what looked like blood on the floor. Neville was found in the kitchen, dressed in pyjamas, lying over an overturned chair next to a fireplace, amid a scene suggestive of a struggle. He had been shot 8 times, 6 times in the head and face, fired when the rifle was at a few inches from his skin. The remaining shots to his body had occurred from at least 2 feet away. Based on where the empty cartridge cases were found, 3 in the kitchen and 1 on the stairs, the police concluded that he had been shot 4 times upstairs, but had managed to get downstairs where a struggle took place, and during which he was hit several times with a rifle and shot again, this time fatally. There were 2 wounds to Neville's right side and 2 at the top of his head, which would probably have resulted in unconsciousness. The left side of his lip was wounded, the jaw fractured, and his teeth, neck, and larynx were damaged. The pathologist said that he would not have been able to engage in purposeful talk, according to the Court of Appeal. There were gunshot wounds to his left shoulder and left eyebrow. The court heard that he had black eyes and a broken nose, linear bruising to his cheeks, lacerations to the head, linear type of bruising to the right forearm, bruising to the left wrist and forearm in 3 circular burn-type marks on the back. The linear marks were consistent with Mr. Bamber having been struck with a long, blunt object, possibly a gun. One of the pillars of the prosecution case was that Sheila would not have been strong enough to inflict this beating on Neville, who was 6'4" tall and by all accounts in good health. June's body and clothing were heavily blood-stained. She was found in a nightdress with bare feet. The police believed that she had been sitting up during this part of the attack, based on the pattern of blood on her clothing. She was found lying on the floor by the door of the master bedroom. June had been shot 7 times. 1 shot to her forehead between her eyes was fired under 1 foot away. That another shot to the right side of her head would have caused her death quickly, the court heard. There were also shots to the right side of her lower neck and right forearm, and 2 injuries on the right side of her chest and right knee. The boys were found in their beds in their own room, which was formerly Sheila's room. They had appeared to have been shot while in bed. The court heard that Daniel had been shot 5 times in the back of the head, 4 times with the gun held 1 foot off his head, and once from over 2 feet away. Nicholas had been shot 3 times, all contact or close proximity shots. Sheila was found on the floor of the master bedroom with her mother. She was in a nightdress, her feet bare, and she had 2 bullet wounds under her chin, one of them on her throat. The pathologist, Peter Zenesis, said that the lower of the injuries had occurred from 3 inches away and that the higher one was a contact injury. The higher of the 2 would have unalived her immediately. The lower injury would have unalived her too, he said, but not necessarily straight away. Venezes testified that it would be possible for a person with such an injury to stand up and walk around, but the lack of blood on her nightdress suggested to him that she had not done this. He believed that the lower of her injuries had happened first because it was caused bleeding inside of her neck. The court heard that if the immediately fatal wound had happened first, the bleeding would have not occurred at the same extent. The pattern of blood stains on her nightdress suggested that she had been sitting up when she received both injuries, Vanessa said. Blood and urine samples indicated that Sheila had taken haloperidol and, several days earlier, had used cannabis. There were no marks on her body to suggest the struggle. The firearms officer who saw her said her feet and hands were clean, her fingernails manicured and not broken, her fingertips free of blood, dirt or powder. There was no trace of lead dust. The rifle magazine would have been loaded at least twice during the unalivings. This would usually leave lubricant and material from the bullets on the hands. A scenes of crime officer, Detective Constable Hammersley, said there were bloodstains on the back of her right hand, but otherwise her hands were clean. There was no blood on Sheila's feet or other debris, such as the sugar that was on the downstairs floor. Low levels of lead were found on her hands and forehead at post-mortem, but the levels were consistent with everyday handling of things around the house. A forensic scientist, Brian Elliott, testified that if Sheila had loaded 18 cartridges into a magazine, he would expect to see more lead on her hands. The blood on her nightdress was consistent with her own and no trace of firearm discharge residue on it. Given that Sheila was wearing just a nightdress, it was hard to see how she would have carried the cartridges. The rifle, without the silencer or sights attached, was lying on her body, pointing up at her neck. June's Bible lay on the floor to the right of Sheila. It was normally kept in a bedside cupboard. June's fingerprints were on it, as were others that could not be identified, including one made by a child. The police and media were initially convinced by the unaliving suicide theory. Detective Chief Inspector Thomas Jones was so sure Sheila had unalived her family that he ordered Jeremy's cousins out of the office when they asked him to consider whether Jeremy had set the whole thing up. The Daily Express reported on the 8th of August 1985, the day after the unalivings, the result of this certainty was that the investigation was poorly conducted. The unaliving scene was not secured and searched thoroughly. The evidence was not recorded or preserved. Within a couple of days, the police had burned the blood-stained bedding and carpets, apparently to spare Jeremy's feelings. The scenes of crime officer moved the unaliving weapon without wearing gloves, and it was not examined for fingerprints until weeks later. 3 days after the unalivings, Bamber and the extended family were given back the keys to the house. Police did not find the silencer in the cupboard. One of Jeremy's cousins found it on the 10th of August, which what appeared to be flecks of red paint and blood, and took it to another one of the cousins' homes. It took the police a further 3 days to collect it. A few days after that, the cousins found a scratch on the red mantelpiece that the prosecution said was caused by the silencer during a struggle for the gun, that accounted for the fleck of red paint. The Bible found near Sheila was not examined at all. Journalist David Kinnett wrote that a hacksaw blade that might have been used to gain entry to the house lay in the garden for months. Officers did not take contemporaneous notes. Those who had dealt with Jeremy wrote down their statements weeks later. The bodies were released days after the unalivings, and 3 of them, Neville, June and Sheila, were cremated. Jeremy's clothes were not examined until 1 month later. 10 years later, all blood samples were destroyed. After Jeremy was convicted, the trial judge, Mr. Justice Drake, expressed concern about the less than thorough investigation, while the Times wrote about blunders, omissions and ineptitude. Home Secretary Douglas Hurd requested a report on the investigation from Essex Chief Constable Robert Bunyard in March 1989. Issued a statement to the House of Commons. It is clear that errors were made in the early stages of the police investigation, contrary to existing force practice. The police gave evidence that the unalivings constituted an unaliving suicide and that the bodies were released. Neville, June and Sheila were cremated, the boys were buried. Jeremy's behaviour before and after the funeral increased suspicion among his family that he'd been involved. They alleged that he'd been sobbing during the funeral service of his parents and sister, and at one point seemed to buckle and had to be supported by Mugford, but that he was smiling and joking later in the week. Shortly after the funerals, Jeremy travelled to Amsterdam with Mugford and a friend, where he bought a large quantity of cannabis. The travel agent who sold the tickets said the group had seemed in high spirits. The inquest into the unalivings was opened on the 14th of August 1985. Jeremy also began selling his family's belongings. Mugford's mother was offered June's car, and an ad was placed in the local newspaper asking £900 for Neville's. Just after his first arrest and release in September, Jeremy tried to sell 20 nude photographs of Sheila for £20,000 to The Sun and went on an overseas trip with a friend, this time to St. Tropez. A print from Sheila's right ring finger was found on the right side of the butt of the rifle, pointing downwards. A print from Jeremy's right forefinger was on the rear end of the barrel, above the stock and pointing across the gun. He said that he'd used the gun to shoot rabbits. There were 3 other prints that could not be identified. The silencer was not found on the gun when the bodies were discovered. It was found by one of Jeremy's cousins 3 days after the unalivings in the ground floor office gun cupboard. Whether it was on the gun during the unalivings became a pivotal issue. The prosecution maintained that the silencer had indeed been on the gun, and that this meant that Sheila could not have shot herself. Forensic tests indicated that her arms were not long enough to turn the gun on herself with the silencer attached. If she'd shot the others with a silencer, then realised that the gun was too long for her to shoot herself, the silencer would have been found next to her body. She had no reason to return it to the gun cupboard before coming back downstairs to shoot herself. If Sheila was not the unaliver, it meant Jeremy had lied about the telephone call from his father saying that Sheila had gone berserk with a gun. The police searched the gun cupboard on the day of the unalivings but found nothing. 3 days later, on the 10th of August, Bamber's extended family visited the farm with Basil Koch, an estate executor. During the visit, one of the cousins, David Beaufoy, found the silencer and rifle sights in the gun cupboard. The court heard that this was witnessed by Beaufoy's father and sister, as well as Basil Koch and the farm secretary. Instead of alerting the police, the family took the silencers to Beaufoy's sister's home. Beaufoy said it felt sticky. They found red paint and blood on the silencer, and the surface of it had been damaged. When the police collected the silencer on the 12th of August, 5 days after the murders, 5 days after the unalivings, an officer reportedly noticed an inch-long grey hair attached to it, but this was gone by the time the silencer arrived at the FFS at Huntington, Cambridgeshire. A scientist at the FFS, John Hayward, found blood on the inside and outside surface of the silencer, the latter not enough to permit analysis. The blood inside was found to be the same blood group as Sheila's, although it could have been a mixture of Neville's and June's. A firearms expert, Malcolm Fletcher, said that the blood was back spatter caused by a close contact shooting. Jeremy's cousins returned to the farmhouse to search the source of the red paint on the silencer. In the kitchen, they found marks in the red paint on the underside of the mantelpiece above the AGA cooker. A sample taken by a scenes of crime officer was found to contain the same 15 layers of paint and varnish that were in the paint flake found on the silencer. Casts and marks on the mantelpiece were deemed consistent with the silencer having come into contact with the mantel several times. On the 7th of September 1985, Mugford changed her statement to the police, now alleging that Jeremy had been planning to unalive his family. As a result of her second statement, he was arrested the following day. Jeremy and Mugford had started dating in 1983 when she was 19 and studying for a degree in education at Goldsmiths College in London. She had taken a holiday job in Sloppy Joe's, a pizzeria in Colchester, where Jeremy had a bar job in the evenings. During police interviews, Mugford admitted to a brief background of dishonesty. In 1985, she had been cautioned for using a friend's chequebook after it had been reported stolen to obtain goods worth around £700. She said that she and the friend had repaid the money to the bank. Mugford also acknowledged having helped Jeremy in March 1985 to steal just under £1,000 from the office of the Osea Road caravan site that his family owned. She said that he had staged a break-in to make it appear that strangers were responsible. Mugford was initially supportive for Jeremy. Photographs of his parents and Sheila's funeral show him weeping and hanging onto her arm. During an interview with the police on the day after the unalivings, she said that Jeremy had telephoned her at her home in the early hours of the 7th of August, between 3 and 3:30 a.m, and said there's something wrong at home and sounded worried. She said that she had been tired and had not asked what was wrong. Mugford's position changed the following month after she'd had a series of rows with Jeremy. She seemed to want to end the relationship, and they had argued about his involvement in the unalivings. Mugford told Jeremy he was a psychopath and at one point tried to smother him with a pillow. During one argument on the 4th of September, another woman telephoned Jeremy in Mugford's presence. As it became clear to Mugford that he had been seeing the woman, she smashed a mirror and slapped him. He then twisted her arm up her back. 3 days later, she went to the police and changed her statement. In the second statement, Mugford alleged that between July and October 1984, Jeremy had said that he wished he could get rid of them all. He had talked disparagingly about his old father and mad mother, she claimed, who were trying to run his life. Jeremy was also alleged to have said that his sister had nothing to live for and that the twins were disturbed. The fact that the Bambers were paying for Sheila's expensive flat in Maida Vale annoyed him, she said. In discussions she said she dismissed as idle talk, Jeremy had talked about sedating his parents with sleeping pills, shooting them, and setting fire to the farmhouse. He reportedly said that Sheila would make a good scapegoat. Mugford alleged that he had discussed cycling along the back roads to the house, entering through the kitchen window because a catch was broken, and leaving it via a different window that latched when it was shut from the outside. A telephone call would be made from White House Farm to his home in Goldhanger, because the last phone call made would be recorded. Jeremy claimed to have unalived rats with his bare hands to test whether he was able to unalive, but he said it had taught him that he would not be able to unalive his family, although he allegedly continued to talk about doing so. Mugford said that she'd spent the weekend before the unalivings with Jeremy in his cottage in Goldhanger, where he had dyed his hair black. She had seen his mother's bicycle there, she said. The prosecution later alleged that he had used the bicycle to cycle between his cottage and White House Farm on the night of the unalivings to avoid being seen in his car on the road. Mugford told police that Jeremy had telephoned her at 9:50 p.m. on the 6th of August to say he had been thinking about the crime all day and was pissed off and that it was tonight or never. A few hours later, at 3 to 3:30 a.m. on the 7th of August, Mugford said that he had phoned her again to say, "Everything is going well. Something is wrong at the farm. I haven't had any sleep all night. Bye, honey, and I love you lots." Her flatmate's evidence suggested that the call had come through closer to 3 a.m. Jeremy called later in the morning to tell Mugford that Sheila had gone mad and that a police car was coming to pick her up. When she arrived with the police at Jeremy's cottage, she said that he had pulled her to one side and said, "I should have been an actor." Later on the evening of the 7th of August, Mugford asked Jeremy whether he had done it. He said no, but that a friend of his had, whom he named. The man was a plumber the family had used in the past. Jeremy allegedly said that he told his friend how he could enter and leave the farmhouse undetected, and that one of his instructions had been for the friend to telephone him from one of the phones in the farmhouse that had a memory readout facility. So if the police checked, he would have an alibi. Everything had gone as planned, he said, except that Neville had put up a fight and the friend had become angry and shot him 7 times. The friend had allegedly told Sheila to lie down and shoot herself last, Jeremy said. The friend then placed the Bible on her chest so it appeared she had unalived herself in a religious frenzy. The children were shot in their sleep, he said. Mugford said Jeremy claimed to have paid the friend £2,000. A letter dated the 26th of September 1985 from the Assistant Director of Public Prosecutions who prepared the case against Jeremy suggests that Mugford not be prosecuted for the burglary, the cheque fraud, and a further offence of selling cannabis. Mugford subsequently testified against Jeremy during his trial in October 1986. The judge told the jury that they could convict Jeremy on Mugford's testimony alone. Immediately after the verdict was announced, Mugford sold her story to the News of the World for £25,000. As a result of Mugford's statement, Jeremy was arrested on the 8th of September 1985. As was the friend Mugford said that he had implicated, although the latter had a solid alibi and was released. Jeremy told police Mugford was lying because he had jittered her. He said that he loved his parents and sister and denied that they had kept him short of money. He claimed the only reason that he had broken into the caravan site with Mugford was to prove the security was poor. He further claimed that he occasionally gained entry into the farmhouse through a downstairs window and had used a knife to move the catches from the outside. He also claimed he had seen his parents' wills and that they had left the estate to be shared between him and Sheila. As for the rifle, Jeremy told the police that the gun was mostly used with the silencer off because it would otherwise not fit his case. Charged on the 9th of September with breaking into the Osea Bay caravan site on the 25th of March 1985 and stealing £980, Jeremy was released on bail on the 13th of September, after which he went on holiday to Saint-Tropez with a friend. Before leaving England, Jeremy said that he had returned to the farmhouse, gaining entry by the downstairs bathroom window. He claimed he did this because he had left his keys in London and needed papers from the house for his trips to France. He entered through the window rather than borrowing keys from the farm's housekeeper, who lived nearby. When he returned to England on the 29th of September, Jeremy was arrested at Dover and charged with the unalivings. Jeremy's trial, which lasted 18 days, opened on the 3rd of October 1986 before Mr. Justice Drake and a jury of 7 men and 5 women at Chelmsford Crown Court. The prosecution was led by Anthony Arledge QC and the defence by Geoffrey Rivlin QC, supported by Ed Lawson QC. The Times wrote that Jeremy cut an arrogant figure in the witness box. At one point, when prosecutors accused him of lying, he replied, "That is what you have to establish." The prosecution case was that Jeremy, motivated by hatred and greed, had left White House Farm at around 10 p.m. on the 6th of August 1985, after dining with his family, to drive home to Goldhanger. Later, perhaps, in the early hours of the morning of the 7th of August, he had returned to the farm on his mother's bicycle, which he had borrowed a few days earlier, cycling along a route that avoided the main roads approaching the farmhouse from the back. He had entered the house through a downstairs bathroom window, taken the rifle with a silencer attached, and gone upstairs. He had shot June in her bed. She managed to walk a few steps before collapsing and passing away. He had shot Neville in the bedroom too, but Neville was able to get downstairs where he and Jeremy had fought in the kitchen before Jeremy shot him 4 times, twice in his temple and twice in the top of his head. He had shot Sheila in the main bedroom next to her mother and had shot the children in their beds as they slept. Jeremy then arranged the scene to make it appear that Sheila was the unaliver, the prosecution argued. He discovered that she would not have reached the trigger with the silencer attached, so he removed it and returned it to the gun cupboard, then placed the Bible next to her body to induce a religious theme. After removing the kitchen phone from its hook, he left the house via a kitchen window, perhaps after showering, and banged the window from the outside so that the catch dropped back into position. He had then cycled back to Goldhanger on his mother's bike. Shortly after 3 a.m, he had telephoned Mugford, then police, at 3:26 a.m. to say that he had received a frantic call from his father. To create delay before the bodies were discovered, he had not called 999 and had driven slowly to the farmhouse and had told the police that his sister was familiar with guns so that they would be reluctant to enter. The prosecution further argued that Jeremy had not received a phone call from his father, that Neville was too badly injured after the first shots to have spoken to anyone, that there was no blood on the kitchen phone that had been left off the hook, and that Neville would have called the police before calling Jeremy. They also argued that, had Jeremy really received such a call, he would have dialed 999, alerted the farm workers, and made his way quickly to White House Farm himself. The silencer played a central role in the prosecution's case. It was deemed to have been on the rifle when it was fired because of the blood found inside it. The prosecution said that the blood had come from Sheila's head when the silencer was pointed at her. Had she discovered that she could not shoot herself with a silencer attached, the court heard, it would have been found next to her body. She had no reason to return it to the gun cupboard. That she had carried out the unalivings was further discounted because, it was argued, she had not recently expressed suicidal thoughts. The expert evidence was that she would have not harmed her children or father. She had no interest in or knowledge of guns. She lacked the strength to overcome her father, and that there was no evidence on her clothes or body that she had moved around the crime scene or been involved in a struggle. In particular, her long fingernails had remained intact. The defence maintained that the witnesses who said Jeremy disliked his family were lying or had misinterpreted his words. Mugford had lied about his confession, they said, because he had betrayed her. No one had seen Jeremy cycle to and from the farm. There were no marks on him the night in question that suggested he had been in a fight. No blood-stained clothing of his was recovered. He had not driven to the farm as quickly as he could have after his father telephoned because he was afraid, they said. There was no probative value in finding of a hacksaw in the garden, because Jeremy had entered the house via windows many times, before the unalivings and since. The defence argued that Sheila was the unaliver and that she did know how to handle guns, having been raised on a farm and attended shoots when she was younger. She had a very serious mental illness, had told psychiatrists that she felt capable of unaliving her children, and the loaded rifle and cartridges had been left on the kitchen table by Jeremy. There had been a recent family argument about placing her children in foster care. A former boyfriend of Sheila's gave a written statement to the court that she had had some kind of breakdown in March 1985, in his presence, when she began beating the wall with her fists because the telephone line had gone dead during a call. She said that the phone was bugged and talked about God and the devil, and how the latter loved her. The former boyfriend said that he had feared for the safety of people around Sheila, who had a deep and intense dislike of June. The defence argued that people who carried out so-called altruistic unalivings have been known to engage in ritualistic behaviour before unaliving themselves, and that Sheila might have placed the silencer in the cupboard, changed her clothes and washed herself, which would explain why there was little lead on her hands, or why sugar from the floor was not found on her feet. There was also a possibility that the blood on the silencer was not hers, but it was a mixture of Neville's and June's. The judge told the jury that there were 3 crucial points, in no particular order. Did they believe Mugford or Jeremy? Were they sure that Sheila was not the unaliver who committed suicide? He said that this question involved another. Was the second fatal shot fired at Sheila with the silencer on? If yes, she could not have fired it. Finally, did Neville call Jeremy in the middle of the night? If there was no such call, it undetermined the entirety of Jeremy's story. The only reason he would have known to invent the phone call was that he was responsible for the unalivings. On the 28th of October, after deliberating for more than 9 hours, the jury found Jeremy guilty by a majority of 10-2, sentencing him to 5 life terms with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 25 years. The judge told Jeremy, "Your conduct in planning and carrying out the unaliving of 5 family members of your family was evil, almost beyond belief." In December 1994, Home Secretary Michael Howard told Jeremy that he would remain in prison for the rest of his life, following a decision in 1988 by the Home Secretary of the day, Douglas Hurd.